Chapter 11, Decorative Arts, Crafts, and Design. To start this chapter off, I wanted to discuss a problem I often see when discussing what we call the decorative arts. And you'll hear words like craft used as well. And I think one of the things I've always heard as an art historian throughout my life is this sort of language that somewhat suggests that decorative arts are not really real art. And so there's always been this sort of bias, I think, within art history or within the arts community about what is the actual placement of a decorative art. In the case of the photos you're looking at here, let's say pottery. And there often is this sort of elitism about what is fine art and what is decorative art, what is craft. So I just wanted you to be aware of this as art appreciators, that you might still run into people who try to segment the arts into what we call high art or low art. Personally, myself, I am one of these people that thinks everything is art. You know, if you say it's art, you want it to be art, it's art. You know, that's the way it is. So to me, a painting is no different than pottery. And I think one of the things you also have to address with decorative arts or craft arts are that they're usually utilitarian arts. So the same sort of question we could ask about architecture is, does this usability impact the object? I just say it's a different way of thinking about how art functions. Because if you look at certain cultures, for instance, like non-Western cultures, most of their arts are actually utilitarian arts. And so, again, we have to keep in mind that for many cultures, something like pottery, it's a usable object, yes, but that doesn't mean it can't be aesthetic, right, in its nature. So this Hopi Native American woman that you see here, she wouldn't look at her art and think it any lesser because it's utilitarian. And she wouldn't understand why it shouldn't be aesthetic, why it shouldn't be pleasing to the eye when she designs it. But, again, this has been sort of a problem. So I wanted you just to see a couple terms here that you might run into. I've used the terms high and low art. You might also run into the words major and minor arts. For instance, some art historians still use this idea of major arts being like paintings. So let's say, for instance, Leonardo as a painter, they'd say, well, that's a major artist. And they might look at something like African fabric and say, well, that's a minor art. As I mentioned, personally myself, I don't use these kind of distinctions. I think that, again, it's rather elitist and rather snobbish in a way to imply that one is better than the other. So I don't go there personally. But I want you to be aware of how some of these conversations are often constructed. So if you're going further into the arts, you'll understand when you maybe run into people with this mindset, and you can decide how you feel about it as well. And I'd also mention Western and non-Western often differ on, what are major and minor arts or how art is used. As I mentioned before, a lot of Western cultures, we look at art as being something you hang on the wall and you appreciate, but not maybe something utilitarian. I don't think a lot of us often look at like our pottery or our plates and go, that's art, right? Again, I don't think a lot of Westerners think this way. But non-Western cultures, Asian culture, African culture, and keep in mind, by the way, that Western, non-Western are, again, just convenient labels to sort of segment cultures out. I'm not so sure how useful they actually are in a global world, but they're, again, labels you'll run into. But if you look at like most non-Western cultures, like African culture, Asian cultures, this is what we consider non-Western, a lot of their objects are utilitarian objects, such as the Ming vase from China that you see on the right. So it is a conversation that is deeply embedded within the decorative arts. And, if you're thinking back to your terms from chapter 1, hopefully you do, you can think about how this decorative arts are applied art because they are about design and they are about usability. So go back and revisit that term if you've forgotten about it and think about that. And I gave you here some examples of Wedgwood vases to consider how something is artistic, but also could be a designed object like we talked about with applied art that can be manufactured in volume. And one of the things I've noticed with contemporary artists is that they don't turn their noses up at the decorative arts. They don't have this sort of elitist mentality. So when you think about contemporary artists, you may notice that a lot of them do use what used to be just considered craft arts or decorative arts as their major art. This is Dale Chihuly, for instance. He is a glass maker, a glass worker, and this is the piece that he did for the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas.